President Obama warns Libyan leaders that the U.S. and NATO allies are still considering military options in response to the violence caused by Gaddafi supporters. What impact could the president's threats have on the United States, on Libya, and on the rest of the Middle East? Joining us now, Michael Scheuer, former CIA counterterrorism analyst and the author of the best book on Osama bin Laden you'll ever read, simply titled Osama bin Laden. Michael, welcome to the Glenn Beck program.
Thank you, Judge.
How much of a threat is Muammar Gaddafi to the United States of America at the present time?
Zero, sir.
And what would be the basis, moral, political, economic, or military, for the American president to threaten military action against him?
Arrogance and racism is the answer. Every time Obama opens his mouth, he sounds like a combination of Kipling and Woodrow Wilson. He's going to teach our little brown brothers how to vote and how to elect people. He's really a tragedy for America. He's going to get more of our kids killed in wars that we can't get out of once we start.
Here's what I found a little baffling, Michael. Over the weekend, Secretary of Defense Gates said, and I'm paraphrasing, words to the effect of any president that sends American troops into a land war in Asia, any Secretary of Defense who does this ought to have his head examined. Earlier last week, he said, you know what, a no-fly zone is not easy to accomplish. First, we have to destroy their anti-aircraft weaponry on the ground. Then we have to destroy their planes on the ground. Then we have to destroy their planes in the air. Then we have to monitor a land space about twice the size of Texas. Does the President of the United States know what he's getting us involved in if he threatens military action over there?
I don't think so, sir. He's more concerned with his view, as most of our presidents have been in the last 20 years. In the world's view of him, he wants to be a good guy. He defines the worth of Americans by what they do overseas, instead of looking to fix the problem of 20% of our children going to bed hungry every night. He wants to go to war in North Africa, which would really start a religious war across that whole region.
Now, you spent the bulk of your career in the CIA, and you know how intelligence works. Would the president even be aware of what's going on the ground? Would he know, for example, when he makes a statement like that, whether the rebels are likely to succeed, whether the rebels have their backs to the wall, how the rebels would even react if they knew that the people knew that the United States of America wanted Gaddafi out? Stated differently, Michael Scheuer, wouldn't the threat of the President of the United States against Gaddafi actually coalesce Libyans to support him because they probably hate Americans more than they hate Gaddafi?
Judge, it certainly, whether or not they would support Gaddafi, the focus of the war of both Libyan forces and their opponents would turn on the United States forces and British forces that went in there. We would be the infidels, we would be the occupiers. And we would certainly create a situation that would not be unlike Iraq and Afghanistan. And the president, of course, won't have the will to use the military power that the American people have paid for. The best bet here is for the Congress to pass a resolution that there will be no military action at all unless there's a declaration of war.
Which, you know, there probably would never be. This guy Gaddafi is an interesting character. In 1986, he was an enemy. In 2003, he was a friend. I mean, does the government just decide who its enemies are and who its friends are depending upon the moment? As far as I know, he has never been a threat to the United States of America. Look, he may have ordered that plane shot down and he may have killed individual Americans. That's another issue for another time. But how does the government decide who are its enemies and who are its friends?
They're desperate for oil, Judge, so they don't have to drill in the United States and they don't have to exploit our own resources. And so Gaddafi became a good guy. We were just about to sell him several hundred refurbished armor personnel carriers before this whole business blew up. He was our boy, just like Mubarak.
Wow. Is he any more of an enemy of the United States today than he was 2 months ago?
He's not an enemy, sir. The idea that he can somehow threaten the United States is absolutely insane. What the president is concerned about is the human rights mafia ganging up on him and saying you have to rescue these poor Libyan rebels, when the reality is if every one of Gaddafi's Libyans killed every one of the rebel Libyans or vice versa, it wouldn't make a lick of difference to life in the United States.
Got it. Michael Scheuer, thanks for your thoughts. Thanks for sharing them with us.
Yes, sir.
Why the sudden love affair between the U.S. media and even an Obama administration official and Al Jazeera. Next.
Well, I think it's the word talk about propaganda for Al Jazeera. Thank you for what you're doing.
1.6 million people in the U.S. have watched Al Jazeera English online since Friday. I've been one of them. It's been fantastic TV.
For the first time in the last 20 years, the agenda of the United States and Al Jazeera are the same. It's about democracy. It's about promoting a free flow of information.
Al Jazeera, the primary Arabic news source in the Middle East, is getting a lot of praise in the American media these days. Even our own Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton had this to say last week.
Why are Americans watching Al Jazeera? Because we don't have anything to compete with it, so they're turning to Al Jazeera. You've got a set of global networks that Al Jazeera has been the leader in that are literally changing people's minds and attitudes. And like it or hate it, it is really effective. And in fact, viewership of Al Jazeera is going up in the United States because it's real news. You may not agree with it, but you feel like you're getting real news around the clock.
You feel like you're getting real news around the clock. Is Secretary Clinton right? Is Al Jazeera one of the few sources left for real news? And should we welcome it here in America? Here now to discuss is Seton Motley, president of Less Government. Ooh, that's a great name for your organization, Less Government. Seton, welcome back to the Glenn Beck program. What is she talking about? Is Al Jazeera to be trusted in English or in another language?
Well, there's an old campaign song. You campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. And Al Jazeera campaigns in English and governs in Arabic. And if you're watching Al Jazeera Arabic, you get a whole different perspective on what's going on over there than what you do over here. Part of the reason it hasn't taken off greater here in America, the English version, is because it's just like ABC, NBC, CBS. I watched segments today where they're just bashing the Tea Party just like NBC does, ABC does, so there's no difference.
All right, but do they have a message that they convey about behavior that goes over there that either we don't get from our own homegrown media, Fox or CNN or whoever might be there, and are they trustworthy, or is this a propaganda arm of some government?
Well, I get that, you know, they're stationed in Qatar and they're stationed in Kuwait, and they're based out of those two countries, and I think it's a propaganda arm. I mean, if you watch, there's a great website, memory.org, Middle East Media Research Institute.
Right.
If you watch Al Jazeera's Arabic language clips, it's presenting all kinds of crazy. You've got people saying jihadist things all the time. They reported on a British citizen who joined the Taliban and said death to Americans. If they presented that here, I think they would get ratings. I think they would get viewership. I think there'd be a clamor for what they're doing. But they're not presenting it over here. They're presenting it over there and not giving it to us here. All
right, last question, Seton. We got about 30 seconds, so quickly. Why is Hillary Clinton saying this? Why is she, of all people, telling Americans to watch it?
Because I think they have a similar agenda to what leftists like Hillary Clinton want to see advanced here. So this is another network that does what MSNBC, CNN, ABC does.
Got it. Seton Motley, thank you for joining us. My final thoughts on today's show next. Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? Have we reached a point in our history when the public treasury has become a public trough and the government borrows money today with no intention of repaying it tomorrow? Tonight, debt and taxes. Since the very beginning of this country, the federal government has spent more money than it has collected in taxes and other revenues. One of the inducements for the very existence of the federal government was its offer to the states to assume their Revolutionary War debts. Recall that while George Washington ran the Continental Army, each state had its own militia when we fought the British. The British king called them colonies because he thought he owned them. They referred to themselves as states once the Declaration of Independence was signed and they became sovereign and free. They did, of course, accept the offer of a group of political elites led by the original big government menace Alexander Hamilton, and in return for granting just some of their sovereignty to the new federal government, they were relieved of their enormous war debt. From that point forward, The government, the federal government, was never really out of debt. The debts were worse during wartime when the government borrowed heavily, but eventually the government's debt became manageable. It was not until the Federal Reserve came into existence in 1913 that debt started to get utterly out of control. Even though the federal government always had persons at banks and institutions willing to loan money to it, and even though the lenders could rely on a clause in the Constitution which requires the federal government to repay all of its debt, the Federal Reserve enabled presidents to call the person whom they had just appointed to run the central bank and simply ask for some cash. This printing machine made it far easier for presidents from Woodrow Wilson to Barack Obama to have the money to wage any war or distribute any wealth whenever or however they wanted. Of course, doing so caused inflation right away and raised taxes in the future when the Fed had to be repaid. So all presidents in the last 100 years, from liberals like Wilson and Carter to conservatives like Reagan and Harding to socialists like FDR and Obama, have had little constraint on their ability to borrow the cash to pay for their ventures and have pushed onto future generations the obligation to repay those loans. Today, we are at a crossroads. The federal government's debt is over $14 trillion. President Obama and most of the Democrats and some of the Republicans want to add to that. Today, 25% of all tax revenue collected by the government goes directly to pay the interest on that debt. Today, your Congress, that would be the same Congress that just funded the government for another 2 weeks, must decide what to do. If the Congress raises the debt ceiling, if it borrows more money and adds to the $14 trillion it already owes, it will effectively compel future Congresses to raise taxes to pay that debt back. One of the reasons we have such high taxes today is because of long out-of-office presidents and long out-of-office Congresses have done this to us. Shall we stop it now, as Senators Rand Paul and Mike Lee have suggested, using the Constitution? Or shall we borrow more money to pay back the money we've already borrowed? Reversing debt will help set us free. Adding debt will help enslave future generations of us to the lenders. From New York, defending freedom. Good night, America.